Okay, so the final section of the lecture for this week is about systems properties, and this is the one that the discussion assignment is based on. So what we're going to do is go through some system properties that have around the concept of how do you evaluate like the resilience of a system. What we're going to talk about is some of those properties, particularly as they might relate to sustainable systems. I mean, we're going to be talking about sustainable systems in particularly next week when we talk about sustainable economic systems. So I'm going to focus in on resilience because I'm going to be asking you to look at the food system in Prince George, and some of these system properties are the same. They're the same ones that Hall Smith is talking about, and we're starting to use the systems vocabulary so we can think about what are the system characteristics of communities that are going to relate to sustainability. Okay. So self-organization, we talked about that a little bit when I first started talking about Hall Smith. So a self-organizing system, is that a morally desirable system, quality of a system? It is a quality, let's just say it's a quality of a resilient system, is that it is self-organized. That is, if there's no necessarily head part. If you cut off any part of the system, it can reorganize itself. So resilience, I'm just going to give one definition for that. It's the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance and reorganize while undergoing change so as to retain essentially the same function, structure, identity, and some of the same feedbacks. And a resilient system is going to be less vulnerable to disturbances. So it's that idea, if you have a system that is centrally organized or has something where cutting off one piece of it is going to interrupt the feedbacks or the functions of the rest of the system, that is going to be very vulnerable to disturbance. Resilience itself is if you think about it, it's an ecosystem concept. Much of this vocabulary, and one of the optional readings is about that, much of this vocabulary is from qualities of ecosystems. So in that, and to me, that is why the definition of a resilient system says that the identity of the system is going to be the same thing. So for example, in ecology and ecosystem, to have resilience, the system has to retain its basic features. It's possible that not every human system needs to retain its identity as a system in order to be resilient. A sustainable system, one that persists after a disturbance, will have resilience. But the extent to which it changes or the feedback changes, I think that needs to be, evaluated in terms of whether or not it's normatively desirable. So a resilient food system would have some specific characteristics that we're going to define, would have diversity, would have modularity, it would have tight feedbacks, and it would be self-organized. So if you think about it, that peanut butter system, that peanut butter example, where the one paste factory in Georgia was 2/3 of the peanut butter product, paste for the peanut butter products, went through that one plant. So that means, that there is a lack of diversity in peanut butter and peanut butter paste suppliers. So one bad peanut paste factory spoils the whole bag, as it were. So that also means that there's little modularity around that, because that factory is the only only piece that has that function. So it's the same point, really, that if we knock out that piece, that the whole system breaks down. In the peanut butter paste factory example, there are feedback loops. That is, that there's testing and there's results from testing and there's consequences. But that particular feedback system, which is just made of regulatory information and testing, it didn't work to stop the distribution. In other words, that information, that the energy from that information wasn't strong enough. So that form of feedback was weaker than the form of feedback from selling the, the money received from selling the energy of the money was stronger than the energy of the regulatory feedback to the decision maker at the time. So that food system, what kind of properties does it have? That food system has economies of scale in the production and the distribution. It's certainly less expensive to build one peanut butter paste factory than to build 10 peanut butter paste factories. So it has efficiencies then in the supply chain. And actually those are related to regulatory efficiencies. You only have to regulate one place and see how clean it is and all that kind of stuff. So all of those things which are highly valued in commodity markets, which we'll talk more about next week, have reduced the system property of resilience. So what do we mean when we say diversity in a resilient system? A variety of system elements that can fulfill similar roles, not necessarily the same roles. It's not the same sense in which we use diversity of people, diversity in the classroom, although some of the values are similar. It really can mean the diversity of actors, diversity of supply, the diversity of niches, again, in that ecological sense. For example, if you're in a smaller community, is it better to be have a specialist niche or a generalist niche? Well, it's better to have 2 or 3 ways of making a living as an individual. So these are, that's an ecological type of diversity, and a diversity of ideas and strategies. All these things, all these characteristics of pieces in the system are going to help to create a more diverse system or more resilient system. So diversity in a food system is, when I say more producers of smaller scale, that's highly related to that concept of modularity, right? Except in a modular, the functions are going to be the same. In a diverse systems, the functions might, be a little bit different. So one smaller producer is a mixed farm, and one smaller producer is a dairy specializing in cheese, and one smaller producer is a market garden. So that's the difference between diversity and modularity in terms of scale. So there's going to be, if there's going to be more elements in the system, then there's going to be more like arrows for social connections, more types of feedback in the system. So there will be more social practices, and that doesn't always create more resilient systems. If there's pressure to conform, pressure to do the same thing, but when there's also likely to be information exchange, you get tighter feedback loops. So anyway, you have some feedbacks in the system that are like personal relationships, immediate and known consequences. In terms of risky behavior, like going ahead and sending the salmonella on down the line, If you have personal relationships with your customers, you're much less likely to be motivated by the money to sell them the poisonous food. So in a resilient community, if one part is destroyed or disturbed or taken down, the shock may not ripple or won't ripple through the entire system, because there's a wide diversity of solutions developed creatively in response to local circumstances that can meet its needs despite shocks to major systems like transportation. So now I'm going to define modularity. I'm going to try again to distinguish it from diversity. Literally modules, which means small units. So a modular home is where they're all produced in the same way, and you can get sort of different parts that add on. It's a modular design tends to be able to be built on in units. So a modular system has many smaller scale sites of production or other system function, many smaller scale sites of consumption that are loosely networked. Any one module could be shut down and the whole system would continue to operate. So, you know, biologically, you're born with 2 kidneys, and you know, a more modular system, you'd have 3 kidneys. The contrast to modularity is centralization or even bottlenecking, where a single site, excuse me, where there's only one site playing that function. Tightness of feedbacks, and I'm reviewing these so that you can definitely use these in the discussion. So how quickly impacts are felt from one part of the system to another. If we get new information, a new feedback, do we get an immediate response or do we get a delayed response? A resilient food system, it's going to be diverse in supply, diverse in producers, would not be completely reliant on the local. Many disturbances are going to be local or regional. You know, you can have freak, like a hailstorm is a pretty local weather event, and it can knock out, you know, a part of your food system. And if you're entirely local, single site, that's not super resilient. So you think about scale in that way. You would want to think about it in terms of what the disturbances likely are. It would be a resilient food system would be modular, loose network, strengthened producer-consumer networks, so more lines of feedback, more relationship. Would likely rebalance the profit-risk sharing, and profit and risk are, again, we'll talk about those parts of a system when we talk about the economic system next week. But tight feedbacks, natural, regulatory, relationship-wise. And, sorry, what I'm wanting you to do is, I'm just going to bring up the discussion assignment on the screen here. Let me just reshare this baby. Okay. Great, I've got the view set to 4 screen. Okay. Let's bring this up big enough so that you can see it. Okay, so what I'm wanting you to do for a discussion assignment is use those vocabulary words, because we just went through a whole bunch of vocabulary words. And I don't know how familiar they are to you or not familiar. So what I want you to do is work in pairs. This assignment appears on the discussion assignment in Blackboard, just like this. You don't have to write this down. And I want you to use the rest of the class time to discuss, I'm calling it C to F, to discuss this situation, and then write this description. You can also write the description in pairs, like if the two of you work on it together and you write one description and you both submit exactly the same thing, let me know who you're working with. That's fine. So both people in the pair can submit the same piece of writing. So this assignment is just think about the food system in Prince George. Just one way to do that is to just start from a meal. I mean, depending on your learning style and how abstract you are, one way to do this is just to describe the ingredients and then think about how they got to your plate, whether you're sitting in a restaurant or sitting at home, or just describe a meal. And you don't have to, hopefully it's not a very local meal, so that you can think about the resilience or you can think about the effect of a disturbance on that. I mean, if you're eating carrots you just pulled from your garden, you'll have a harder time linking from that to the whole system. So, try to use a meal that's useful for the assignment. So then I want you to, I've just made up a possible food system disturbance, and you can tell your own story. But this is my little story about how Prince George could get cut off for a couple of weeks. And then sort of imagine how what happens after that event happens. How do people in the city feed themselves? Or do they act like those people that, clear out all the Wonder Bread off the store shelves in the first hour or whatever? Anyway, so use that story to think about vulnerabilities and disturbances and all those other vocabulary words. And then I want you to write a description, and I want you to use the words system, feedback, resilience, disturbance, vulnerability, self-organization, diversity, and modularity, all in sentences. And you need to use them so that I can tell that you understand or don't understand them. So the feedback on this assignment will be 1 point for correct use of each word, with a bonus 2 points for the coherence, that's a system property, of the description. So that's the discussion assignment. Thanks. Talk to you soon.